Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our second Friday meeting for 2025. I'm Jean James, in case you've forgotten who I am, of the Canberra Jung Society. Thank you for joining us again here at McKillop House and online. Let us first acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Well, it looks as though we've survived the AGM once again. Thank you again to the last year's committee and to those brave and generous people who have taken up the committee roles for the coming year. Oh, we just go on another year, don't we? I've been the president of this society now for 7 years. And vice president for another 7, I think. This evening, we're delighted to welcome back our guest speaker, our friend, Dr. Martin Hess. Martin will report to us about his experience and reflections from travels in Southeast Asia, particularly as a pilgrimage to the Burma-Thailand Railway, which carries such heavy cultural and emotional significance to many Australians, including me, where my father was interned in the Burmese Railway. So this is very special for me. Dr. Martin Hess was a member of the Australian Federal Police for 30 years, detective background in investigations, intelligence, surveillance, close protection and international police deployment, PhD in Australian International Policing from Asia Pacific College of Diplomacy at Australian National University. Interested in interagency, whole of government cooperation, criminology and geostrategic affairs. If you're here on Zoom, please remain muted while Martin is speaking. Use Zoom chat for comments and we'll open up later for discussion. Following Martin's presentation, we'll have a short break and resume for discussion and questions, finishing by 10 p.m. Note that we're recording this event for later reference. Thank you, Martin. It's great to have you back. That's wonderful.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging all the police and emergency services workers who are currently working 24/7, particularly in northern New South Wales and southeastern Queensland, in the face of the cyclone that's about to hit them. Uncharacteristically, I lived through a few cyclones when I lived in far north Queensland, and I know what it's like. So here's to them. Let's wish them the best of British, both physical and mental scars on people. All right, so I'll start. Aside from being a member of the AFP for 33 odd years, I was also a long-term military reservist, and I first joined Melbourne University Regiment in Melbourne, clearly, in 1979. I returned with some mates in February this year to visit the railway. So there was 10 of us who went. So in February 2025, a group of 10 former soldiers of Melbourne University Regiment and members of the Melbourne University Rifles Association, which is like the association associated with the regiment, travelled to Thailand to visit and pay respects at the Thai-Burma Death Railway, in which so many Allied prisoners of war from Britain, Australia and the Netherlands, as well as many more Asian forced labourers, suffered and died in 1942-43 as the Imperial Japan. It's important to appreciate the context of this forced construction through difficult terrain in a very challenging tropical environment. In purely technical terms, the railway is a 415-kilometre long narrow gauge railway. Construction was extremely difficult, with the route crossing through thick mosquito-infested jungle and uneven terrain in both seasonal monsoon conditions and dry conditions. Rivers and canyons had to be bridged, and sections of the mountains had to be cut away to create a bed that was straight and level enough to accommodate the narrow gauge track. Decisions made in London to prioritise British naval and air assets for the fight in Europe left the Far East colonial possessions vulnerable. In December 1941, an expansionist and anti-European colonial Imperial Japan was virtually unopposed as its forces invaded and violently occupied most of Southeast Asia. After occupying Indochina, on the 8th of December 1941, the IGA, Imperial Japanese Army, launched an attack and invasion across the Gulf of Thailand at 3 locations. 2 in Thailand, Singora and Patani, and one in Peninsular Malaya at Kota Bharu, followed by the sinking of two Royal Navy capital ships, HMS Repulse and HMS Prince of Wales, on the 10th of December 1941. Over the next month, there were battles at various places down the Malayan Peninsula, with Allied forces outnumbered, outflanked and outmanoeuvred. Singapore, after about a week of fighting, eventually surrendered on the 15th of February 1942. As stated by Australian historian Peter Broun in his authoritative work on the subject, that's a large book there on the table. If you want to read about this period of history, that's the book really to go to. It's very good. As he states, within a period of some 6 hours and 35 minutes on the 7th of December 1941, Greenwich Mean Time, the Japanese had landed in Malaya, bombed Pearl Harbor, the Philippines and Hong Kong, and now 3 days later, the British Prime Minister had announced the destruction of two of the nation's premier capital ships, Repulse and Prince of Wales. As a result, with the fall of Singapore on the 8th of February 1942, over 50,000 British and Empire troops surrendered and a significant amount of their equipment was transferred to Japanese hands. These men were to form the basis of the forced labour used on the Death Railway. The ultimate Japanese objectives were manifold: to secure resources necessary in Japan as an industrial power, to occupy a sphere of influence which later became known as the Great East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, which was based on the notion of Asia for the Asians under Japanese leadership, and was deliberately aimed at the overthrow and removal of European colonial powers. To that end, the longer-term strategic objective was to create a base in Burma to cut the Burma Road, which is the main Allied main supply route into southern China, with a view to eventually invading China from the south, and also to form a base for the eventual encouragement of a local insurrection in India via an active anti-British Indian nationalist movement, starting with the Indian state of Assam. Once Allied naval power regrouped and recouped after the epic 1942 naval battles of Midway, Coral Sea and Guadalcanal, Japanese shipping around Singapore Straits and the Straits of Malacca, the main supply route for the IGA in Burma, was vulnerable to attack by Allied submarines operating from Ceylon. I'll just note here that for consistency, the names of countries are: Malaya is now Malaysia, including the two states in Borneo. Siam is now Thailand, Burma is now Myanmar, and Ceylon is now Sri Lanka, for those who are concerned about that sort of stuff. An alternative route to sustain the IGA forces in Burma was sought, and a railway linking existing railheads in Thailand and Burma was the decision. A railway route between Burma and Thailand, crossing the Three Pagodas Pass and following the valley of the Kwai Noi River in Thailand, had been surveyed by the British government of Burma as early as 1885. But the proposed course of the line, through hilly jungle terrain divided by many rivers, was considered too difficult to construct. Nonetheless, the Japanese continued with their project using the Merriam-Wigan Engineer's Handbook, which was the standard engineer's handbook of the time. This was the handbook used by the engineers on the great transcontinental railways construction in the United States in the 19th century. The name used by the Japanese government was the Tai Men Rensetsu Tetsudo, which means the Thailand-Burma Rail Link. That's the regrouping of the Allied Navy, primarily US Navy. The actual construction was done by two forces, one based in the west and one based in the east, which worked towards each other, meeting at Konkuta in Thailand in October 1943. The Japanese army transported 500,000 tonnes of freight, primarily heavy military equipment for the use in Burma, over the railway during the course of the war. After preliminary work on airfields and infrastructure, construction of the railway began in Burma and Thailand on the 16th of September 1942. Project completion date was December 1943, so it's only just over a year. Much of the construction material, including tracks and sleepers, was brought from dismantled branches of the Malaya's Federated Malay States Railway Network, which had been built by the British, and the East Indies various rail networks. The construction cost the lives of approximately 15,000 Allied POWs and 100,000 Asian forced labourers as a result of neglect, disease, starvation, malnutrition, exhaustion, and mistreatment. Prisoners were made to work around the clock with individual shifts lasting as long as 18 hours. The cuttings at Hellfire Pass became known as the Speedo period after a command shouted by Japanese guards and engineers to the English-speaking prisoners. This was in a direct response to the reversal of naval fortunes in the Indo-Asia Pacific after the naval battles in the Pacific in 1942. So they were taken by train. They were all interned in Singapore, the fall of Singapore. Everybody in Southeast Asia was pretty much concentrated in Changi, and then they were dispersed from there for various labour tasks, including the Thai-Burma Railway. The mortality rate was very high, particularly among the Asian labourers. More than a quarter of Allied POWs would die by the end of the war, and nearly half of the Asian labourers, primarily from maltreatment, starvation, overwork and disease. Around 12,000 Japanese soldiers, including 800 Koreans, were employed on the railway as engineers, guards and supervisors of the POW and civilian labourers. Although working conditions were far better for the Japanese than the POWs and soldiers, POWs and civilian workers, about 1,000, about 8% of them died during construction. The Japanese soldiers are remembered as being cruel and indifferent to the fate of Allied military prisoners and the Southeast Asian civilians. Many men in the railway workforce bore the brunt of pitiless, uncaring guards. Cruelty would take different forms, from extreme violence and torture to minor acts of physical punishment, humiliation and neglect. In addition to malnutrition and physical disease, malaria, cholera, dysentery and tropical ulcers were a common contributing factor to the death of workers on the railway. So I'm going to put up some quotes that come primarily from Hellfire Pass. There's an interpretive memorial there, which I'll talk about in a minute, but that's actually funded by the Australian government. It's very, very good and quite moving. We had quite a moving experience there, actually. Construction camps housing at least 1,000 workers each were established every 8 to 17 kilometres of the route. Workers were moved up and down the railway line as needed. The construction camps consisted of open-sided barracks built of bamboo poles with thatched roofs. The barracks were about 60 metres long, with sleeping platforms raised above the ground on each side of an earthen floor. 200 people were housed in each barrack, giving each person a 2-foot wide space in which to live and sleep. Most of the clothing, hats and boots carried by the POWs from Changi deteriorated rapidly, and as a result, most men worked barefooted and wore only loincloths. This, of course, exposed them to diseases such as malaria and exposure to the harsh elements, plus things like snakes and scorpions and all the other bites that exist in that part of the world. The work itself was grueling and dangerous. Apart from building bridges, it involved clearing jungle, then constructing embankments or cuttings on steep hills to ensure the gradient of the track was gentle enough for the trains. The Japanese and conscripted Korean guards forced the prisoners to work to exhaustion day after day. They savagely beat anyone who they decided was not working hard enough and demanded that even the seriously ill work. The diet primarily consisted of thin gruel made from rice with very small amount of vegetables. An effective display at Hellfire Pass, which is what's up here, interpretive centre, demonstrates that the average daily allocation of rice was 370 grams, with an expectation that each prisoner would move 3 cubic metres of rock. Just have a look at the imbalance there. That's the display. That bowl of rice is a daily ration. That cage with the rocks is what each individual prisoner had to move. Do the maths. It's no wonder so many people died. Much of this maltreatment was due to a strict Japanese military code, as stated by Broome, the very large book over there. Upon joining the army, the conscript became one already dead. The recruit had thus renounced any right of privilege or ambitions for his own life. A soldier's death was thus seen as an inspirational and pure act, which was likened to the precise moment of perfection of the fall of the cherry blossom. Sublime death, if it came, brought honour to his emperor, nation and family. Correspondingly, surrender to an enemy brought disgrace and humiliation, not only upon the Japanese soldier, but upon his emperor, nation and family. It followed, therefore, that through Japanese eyes, enemy prisoners of war had shamed themselves and deserved contempt and ill treatment. Just some stuff about the invasion of Malaya. I'll just backtrack a little bit. The sort of mentality of these people in relation to Asia for the Asians. There was a guy called Peter Brune. This is from his book. Japanese troops entered Kuala Lumpur around 8 p.m. on the 11th of January 1942 and took over the civil administration and quickly enforced law and order. In a sign of things to come, law and order were certainly quickly enforced. The heads of likely anti-Nippon locals or those who had looted were displayed on poles in public. That was happening in Singapore as well. They happened all the way down the peninsula. It was pretty brutal stuff. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about some of the conditions on the railway and some of the disposal of corpses, which is a fairly morbid thing, but it's an eventuality with not so many people dying. That's what's going to happen. If anyone's squeamish about this sort of stuff, please let me know and leave the room, block your ears, whatever you want. Okay, this is from Peter Brune as well. There were many ways of dying on the railway: dysentery, beriberi, pellagra, malaria, oedema, and diarrhea. And there's the seemingly harmless scratch that slowly becomes a creeping, foul, pus-ridden nightmare that envelops the leg or foot, sometimes causes an amputation, and sometimes death. But the mere mention of the word cholera would constitute the ultimate form of terror for both the POW and his guards. You can have a mate who is here now, but soon unrecognisable and gone within hours. That's a quote from Sergeant Frank Baker. At a number of camps along the railway, the cremation pyres would burn all night, during the day and all night again, and the distorted, wasted corpses would be burned in their dozens. The lingering images of Rhesus sardonicus, the pre-death sardonic grin caused by spasms of the facial muscles, and those roaring infernos would haunt observers long after captivity. It's just a reality of life in those places, under those conditions. Quite inexperienced in the art of cremation, we had put the bodies in the pyre face up and which no doubt caused the construction of the sinews and tendons. One of the dead bodies had taken a sitting position, and as we passed, one arm rose slowly. That's from a guy called Captain Fred Stahl. The daily curetting and the amputating of 9 or 10 legs was a never-ending fight against the scourge of tropical ulcers. Such ulcers spread with great speed, and once they had penetrated the connective tissue on the leg and had entered muscle tendons and the lining around the bones, the severe scraping and cutting led to horrible scarring at best and often to amputation and death. So you can see the conditions. Very good. In relation to the daily routine, Ravelli invariably was 0700 hours in pitch darkness and usually in pouring rains. Mess orderlies would have to attend at the cookhouse and stagger up a slimy slope carrying heavy mess dixies of rice. Other men, meanwhile, would have lined up in the queue to take their turn in dipping their mess tins in boiling water for sterilisation purposes, those who were lucky enough to have mess tins. They would then move to a second lineup to receive their rice and finally were compelled to squat or stand in the rain while consuming their ration. Immediately after this was over, they lined up again to wash their mess tins and be issued with their luncheon issues of rice to be carried out to work with them. Arriving in camp at around 22:15 hours, so 10:15 in the evening, they would line up to sterilise their mess gear and then draw their evening meal of rice and jungle leaf flavoured water. The more fortunate would cluster around a fire and then grope their way down to the river to wash off the day's mud and sweat. Another sick parade and dressing completed, the men were able, usually by 2300, to don a damp shirt, if such an article was still in their possession, roll themselves in a blanket, probably damp, and lie down under a rotted, dripping tent. A day off in camp was by no means a day of rest. The first task usually consisted of scrubbing clothes. Soap was non-existent, the river muddy, and the mud and sweat from the fortnight's work did not make this task easy. By 1000 hours, camp duties had been allotted, such as drain digging and maintenance and digging for fresh latrines, cutting and carrying of bamboo for construction of floors for the ever-increasing hospital patients, firewood fatigues, and possibly the most nerve-wracking of all, cremation parties. And I've just spoken about the conditions that people were cremating bodies under. When I read that, I'd been stoic throughout the whole visit, but when I read that, particularly the reference to Silent Night, I started to choke up. We then went down into the Hellfire Pass itself, which I'll explain in a minute, but that was quite a moving thing. That's what started me. As soon as I read that Silent Night quote, that's what started me. Do you want me to read the previous one? No? Yes? Can you go back one? Back. That's it. Right, this is a quote from an unattributed quote. I never heard one of them complain about the hand fate had dealt them. Some died with mud-stained photos of their loved ones clutched in their bony hand. One of the last to die was sleeping restlessly a few paces up from me. In his delirium, he was making a noise similar to a groan. I was too sick to move for 2 days. I listened to that groan. Then it suddenly came to me. It wasn't a groan at all. He was trying to hum Silent Night. Every man who worked on the railway, in whichever section, would have an automatic passport to heaven. They have all done the requisite stretch in hell. That's from Private Max McGee. When a man died, he died in an aura of love and brotherhood. You died with your head in the lap of a mate, with somebody holding your hand, with somebody with a hand on your forehead, saying a little prayer. That's from Stano Noel, another prisoner. I never sat at a chair, at a table to eat a meal. I never had soap. I never had a toothpaste, a towel. Just normal things that you have in everyday life. We just never had those things. We never had a tap or a source of water where you could go and get a drink. The only water you had was what you took out with you to work out on the railway. And that had to last you for the day. Okay, these are some sketches from a guy called Chalker, Jim Chalker. He was a British POW. We visited a specific park devoted to Weary Dunlop, one of the Australian medics. The British guy thought so much of him that these aren't original. I think the originals are still in Britain, but these are, no, he made a book. His book's over there. It's worth leafing through it just because they're first-hand sketches of what he recalled of his experience on the railway. So there, a prisoner's been beaten by the Japanese for whatever reason. There's another guy there lying there who's obviously suffered the same fate. They're operating, you can see how skinny these guys are. They're operating on some poor guy's leg with the ulcers. That's the sort of tents they were living in. You can see, you can imagine what it'd be like there with malaria and dengue and all the other diseases. That's at Hellfire Pass. The reason it was called Hellfire Pass, which I'll go into in a minute, was because of the lighting at night. So that's a pretty graphic picture, but that's what it was like, according to Chalker. So that's a Whampoa, like a viaduct. You can see how pretty it is. It's actually a beautiful part of Thailand. It's a really, really pretty place. That's the Kwai. The word Kwai actually means river. So when people say River Kwai, they're actually saying river. But that's the Kwai Noi. The small Noi means small. It's the small river. This is a viaduct around a mountain to get to a place called Wampo on the other side. We walked along that, along the those trestles. That's not the original wood, but the design is the original. So the wood's been replaced. Clearly, it perishes pretty quickly, but that's the design. And that design, all those trestles and that sort of stuff came from the American handbook, the engineer's handbook that I mentioned before. Okay, this is Hellfire Pass. So all of my colleagues, eminent in their own respective fields, are former soldiers of Melbourne University Regiment Headquarters Company, primarily from the Mortar Platoon and 2 from the Assault Pioneer Platoon, including myself. This is when MUR functioned along the lines of a standard infantry battalion before a policy change in the early 1980s saw the conversion of university regiments into a purely officer training function. We've been mates from those days, and this visit to the Thailand-Burma Death Railway in February 25 celebrated and consolidated our mateship in innumerable ways by some very powerful bonding experiences in a uniquely emotional environment. We began our visit with a dinner at the British Club in in Bangkok, where we were able to avail ourselves of reciprocal rights courtesy of our membership of the Canberra Services Club here in Canberra. It was a great night which set the mood for our 3-day visit to pay our respects along the Death Railway. The next day we went with our Thai tour guide Pum and at the Ambassador Hotel in Bangkok and drove to Kanchanaburi, which was the headquarters of the Japanese, where we met with our Australian historian and tour guide Andrew Snow from the Thailand-Burma Railway Centre, Kanchanaburi. Andrew's father was a POW who had survived working on the Death Railway, so it was quite poignant for him. Locations visited. We visited the Commonwealth War Cemetery at Kanchanaburi. It contains the graves of 6,982 Allied military personnel comprising 3,585 British, 1,896 Dutch, 1,362 Australians and 12 members of the British Indian Army, including British officers, 2 New Zealanders, 2 Danes and 8 Canadians. We visited and paid respects at the individual graves and at the cemeteries. We then visited the Thailand-Burma Railway Centre at Kanchanaburi, the TBRC. It's a museum and research centre. It's privately funded. The centre is located in the west of Kanchanaburi War Cemetery and is housed in the former headquarters of the Imperial Japanese Army. Andrew Snow, our tour guide and historian, works from there. We then went to Three Pagodas Pass on the Thailand-Burma Railway. Three Pagodas Pass is a pass in the Tenasserim Hills on the border between Thailand and Burma at an elevation of 282 metres. The pass links the town of Sangkhlaburi in the northern Kanchanaburi province, Thailand, to the town of Payatonsu in the south of Kayin State, Burma. The pass is named after 3 pagodas erected in 1929 by Pra Sri Suwan Kiri, the ruler of Sangkhlaburi, with the assistance of local villagers. The pass repeatedly served as a route for Indian monks in the 3rd century to disseminate Buddhism in India. Hellfire Pass. The name Hellfire Pass came from the appalling working conditions at and around the site. In mid-1943, when the Japanese introduced the Speedo period to meet tight deadlines for completing the railway, prisoners were forced to work long hours into the night. Their work site was lit by oil lamps and bamboo fires. The flickering light, the noise from the drilling of the rock and the suffering of hundreds of poorly fed prisoners seemed the very image of hell. For men working at Hellfire Pass, hunger was never a present problem. A prisoner had to move 3 cubic metres of rock every day, and the average size of the daily ration was 370 grams, which I saw the photos before. We also visited the Weary Dunlop Memorial Park. Australian Army Surgeon Ernest Weary Dunlop became renowned for his tireless effort in treating and saving many wounded and ill prisoners. Dunlop was captured in March 1942 when the Japanese took control of Java, and in January 1943 he was sent to work as a medical officer on the Burma Railway. Dunlop risked his life by standing up to the Japanese on behalf of the men in his care. This beautiful memorial park became possible only by the friendship between Weary Dunlop and a local Thai landowner, Mr. Kun Kanet Wanachot, OAM, who had a chance of meeting, who after a chance meeting devoted 15 acres of his own land overlooking the Quainoi to a memorial park in honour of Weary Dunlop, who he recognised as a great humanitarian. This started a group known as the Quiet Lions. It also houses a collection of sketches by British POW Jack Chalker, who also formed a strong bond with Weary Dunlop. It's located 80 kilometres upriver from Kanchanaburi and 4 kilometres upriver from Hellfire Pass. For his devotion to Thai-Australian relationships, particularly through the friendship with Weary Dunlop, Mr. Wanachot was awarded the Order of Australia Medal. The Mura group had a very good lunch there. Prior to Anzac Day service at Hellfire Pass, the Anzac Eve every year, a service is held at this park, hosted by the Quiet Lions in honour of Weary Dunlop and all of the Australian Army medics and medical officers who saved so many lives. We held a small ceremony. It was stifling hot, humid, as you can imagine what it would be in that sort of place. No air, no breeze. One of our number, a colonel still serving, said the following: "Help us understand what happened here and why. We reflect on the sacrifices made by those who serve their nation with resilience, courage and mateship. As a younger generation, we are grateful for the example they set us. We hope that they believe that we are worthy of the sacrifices they made. We reflect on the values that they helped establish and what we stand for: service, courage, respect, integrity, excellence. We say to those whose spirits rest here, we are Australian soldiers, physically and mentally resilient, compassionate and courageous. We lead by example, strive to take the initiative and pursue excellence. We are committed to learning and working with the team. We believe in trust, loyalty, integrity, and respect our country, our brothers and sisters and our army. The rising sun is our badge of honour and our service, and in service of our nation. We are Australian soldiers always." That's from Colonel Bruce Oswald. Another guy then, Steve Ward, then read the ode: "Thou shalt not grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them." We then drank a toast from a hip flask, and at the immediate conclusion of this informal and impromptu service, in the stifling stillness of the cutting, a cool, gentle breeze blew across our small gathering, and hundreds of leaves fluttered down to earth from the surrounding trees. We all looked at each other and someone said, "That's Weary saying thanks." None of us are given to sentiment, but we all felt it. This had a profound emotional impact on the group as a whole and upon each member as individuals. It was an extremely moving experience. We also visited that's the group there. So I'd just like to point out these guys. So the guy on the far left with the green shirt is a guy called Mike Pekovic. He's originally a Serbian, or his parents are Serbian, from Geelong. Stu Walden is a RAF wing commander and a business analyst. Bruce Roberts is an Asian South African, born in Cape Town, but we're all part of the same platoon. That's me with the grey stuff on. Steve Ward is the guy with the light coloured shorts. The guy with the orange pants is Bruce Oswald. He's originally from India, born in India. Ash Moore is an engineer. Howie Burville is also an engineer. He and I did the same recruit course in 1979 at Puckapunya. Freddie Tuckfield is a Latin scholar and a classics scholar at Camberwell Grammar. He's retired now, but he speaks about 6 languages. And the guy at the very end, Watto, is owns a wine bar in Lygon Street, Carlton. So that's the statue of Weary Dunlop, actually at the Australian War Memorial here in Canberra. If you do visit the War Memorial and you happen to pass the statue of Weary Dunlop, just give him a nod. You know. A great Australian. I'm sure that's him walking out of Hellfire Pass. I can't guarantee it, but I think he went there for a dedication. It's just a great photo. It captures it perfectly. It's a photo of a photo. I didn't actually read the caption to it, but he's got his hand in his hand. He was actually cremated in Thailand and had his ashes scattered around the Quainoi in various parts of the Quainoi. Still still recognised by the Thais as a great humanitarian. Next, please. That's the casualty rates. So you can see the Asians really copped it. That Asia for the Asians wasn't a good idea for them. Next. That's Canberra Cemetery. As I said, there's about 6,000 odd people buried there. They consolidated where people have been buried and consolidated the graves where they could. That's a cenotaph in Canberra Cemetery.
So who maintains that cemetery?
Commonwealth War Graves Commission.
Sorry.
British. It's a Commonwealth thing, so every Commonwealth country puts in for funds it. They're all around the world, and we've had soldiers, British in particular, have had soldiers die everywhere. Cyprus, New Guinea, I think there's one in Burma, Thailand, Gallipoli. There's these graves are all over the place. We also visited a Japanese memorial. That's the only inscription that I could see devoted to the Allied prisoners of war. In each corner there was things in local languages, Chinese, Malay, Tamil, and various other things, saying whatever they said. But the inscription on the cenotaph reads that. During the construction of the Burma Railway, an unfortunate disease occurred, and the workers of the various countries of the South suffered from an unfortunate disease. That's it. This kind of official denial is a bit of a problem. So the reasons for Japanese cruelty were complex, and while many guards treated the prisoners abominably, not all did. In the immediate post-war years, Australia tried 924 Japanese servicemen for war crimes across the Asia Pacific. A total of 644 were convicted and 137 executed. Of these, 111 were convicted and 32 executed, specifically for crimes committed on the Burma Railway. Another book over there is a guy called Cappe, who was a colonel in the Australian Army. He was a prisoner of war. He was in F Force, which was probably one of the worst forces, one of the last ones, but one of the worst treated. He wrote in his return to Australia, although Japan is not a signatory to the Geneva Convention of 1929, she was party to the Hague Convention of 1907, under which she, in common with other signatories, granted humanitarian treatment for prisoners of war and promised inter alia to make adequate arrangements for the care of the sick, to treat prisoners of war as regards rations, quarters and clothing on the same footing as her own troops, and not to employ them to excess. Not only had Japan broken her pledged word, but her barbarous conduct must forfeit any claims she may have to be recognised as a civilised nation. It's felt that these conditions are intolerable, and were the full facts known to Tokyo, they could not and would not be countenanced by a nation as Japan, by such a nation as Japan, ranking as does that country among the great powers of the world. Next one, please. That's in the Kanchanaburi Interpretive Centre. All right, let's just talk about some of the lessons learned or not learned. There are many lessons to be learned from this terrible phase of Australian and Southeast Asian history. The first is about preparedness. In a region which has a history of volatility and which autocracy is again on the march, liberal democracies like Australia need to be prepared for short-term and longer-term threats to our liberal democracy. This involves vigilance and honesty about the reality we face as a liberal democratic nation in a region where liberal democracy has not been the traditional norm. This involves an honest appraisal that our great and powerful friends and allies may not be able to be relied upon. The second relates to practicalities of handling. Next one, please. Of handling large numbers of prisoners and internees. This includes their rights, how they should be treated. One particular lesson for military readers is the high level of survivability by soldiers, even in the most extreme circumstances. There is ample evidence to support the position that the more cooperative the relationship between the commanding officers and the regimental medical officers, the higher rate of survivability. The third relates to historical truth. The tragedy which occurred on the Thailand-Burma Railway has been largely forgotten. It's been largely forgotten, downplayed, or even totally ignored in our own military, social and educational institutions. As a result, lessons hard learned have been forgotten. Next. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions. We'll have a little break. We're going to have a little break and then I'll take questions. Do I have any Japanese friends? I've got a friend who I served in the AFP with, whose mother was Japanese, who was in about 20 kilometres from Hiroshima when the bomb went off. He lives on the south coast. He and I are good friends. We're about to write an article about his and I various experiences in the police, as clearly my surname is German, even though that's a very small part of my background. He clearly looks Japanese. So we've had mixed experiences in the services. He was a soldier. He was a 5/7 RAR for a while. He was an APC commander, armoured personnel commander. I've dealt with Japanese in my official duties as a federal police officer. Not many, but the odd one or two, and I've always found them to be pretty good, actually. Is there a reason behind your question?
Well, I guess it's about the way that Japanese people, the soldiers, treated the prisoners. It just seems that there was just this complete lack of humanity. But my experience with the Japanese when I lived in Japan for 4 years was they were the most polite, cultured, generous, courteous people. And I'm just trying to understand what happened and how they, and it's like you're talking about two completely different.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
Yeah.
It's a real dichotomy. I think dropping 2 nuclear bombs might have a bit of an attitude adjusting type thing.
Do you think that was a good idea?
I'm not going to get into a discussion. I think it shortened the war. I'm not going to get into a discussion about the whole ethics of nuclear warfare. It's not my bag. But I think the effect of it was to shorten the war because, as I said, these people were fanatics, the soldiers. They were backed up by their emperor, and they would have fought to the death. I'm going to go to Canberra at some stage in the next 2 or 3 weeks, I guess, if I get time. I've been there before to the Japanese garden there because the breakout there that occurred in, whenever it was, 43 or 44, where they broke out, they would have murdered the population of Canberra, without a doubt. That's just another part of the story. It was a fanatical generation. They were humiliated by the fact that the Americans, or in fact the British, changed their naval agreement from a naval agreement with Japan to a naval agreement with Washington. And then the Washington put pressure on the Japanese for whatever reason. I don't know what reason it was, but they've been fighting in Manchuria for a while. That was a justification for international sanctions against them, which is why they then invaded Southeast Asia. They had a choice to go into Russia, but there was some chicanery that went on that stopped them doing that. And they ended up in Southeast Asia, and that's how all this story eventuated. I did read something which I haven't quite researched yet, but apparently these military commanders in Southeast Asia were acting fairly autonomously. I don't think they actually did it with the imprimatur, direct imprimatur of headquarters in Japan, but I'm yet to track that one down. So.
Can I say something? My father was in the Burmese railway, and his idea of the Japanese people was that they were very good people, very good soldiers, wonderful, and then very bad.
Yeah.
He had the extreme personalities, and that's what he came across. He came across them in the sense that he worked for Weary Dunlop in the Changi prison with all different diseases and this and that. But his stories were always, and it was interesting because there was a Japanese minister, priest, that turned up in the country when my dad came back from the war. And all the local people said, oh my God, what's Mark going to think of this? This Japanese minister turning up out of the blue, turning up in a Church of England church. Anyway, it was interesting because this fellow had come, his father was a bishop in Japan, and he had very amazing sort of humanity about him. And he became a great friend of my dad's. My dad was dying of prostate cancer at the time, and he came and brought the bread and wine to the house, and his mother, the Japanese fellow's mother, used to come along too, and we became great friends. And then when my dad died, he went and anointed my dad with oils. You know, it's just really amazing, as you say. Really, really quite amazing.
Christianity wasn't really widespread in Japan at the time, but there were incidents of some relatively humane treatment on the railway by Japanese who were Christians.
And then on the other hand, this is just shows the two types of Japanese people too in the war. My dad's friend, Colin Bryan, a very tall man, very imposing and tall. So the Japanese decided they didn't like him anymore. So they went out and tried to kill him with bayoneted and chop his jugular vein. But they didn't quite get it because he's tall, the Japanese are small. And they left him sort of covered in grave, and they left him to die. And then there's another lot of Japanese turned up, and they undid the grave, got him out, and took him to a hospital, and he lived to tell the tale. And he ended up retiring in the Isle of Capri when other Japanese were coming in there. So we had to.
So I think it's a bit of a case of groupthink and that sort of stuff. You know, you're a psychological society. I guess once people, I've been in the military, not that we do anything unethical, but you can understand you as a group, you go along with what the group's doing. Just the way they are. Their group said, we've got to build this railway. They were task focused and they just did it. They didn't care about the expenditure of lives that were under their care. They weren't signatories, as I said, to the Geneva Convention. So they saw themselves as absolved from that.
I think they did it ahead of schedule, actually.
So again?
It was quite successful. You mentioned that they transported 500,000 tonnes of freight.
In engineering terms, it was quite successful, yeah. It's part of it is still in use. They goes out just past Kanchanaburi from Bangkok, but they ripped up the bit between that and Sri Pagoda Pass in Burma, at the Burmese border. So it is what it is. But the interesting thing is one of the things I found really interesting was that Thai billionaire who gave 15 acres to a Weary, just devoted to Weary Dunlop in his park. Incredible. Yeah. And they still, I'm not sure if he's still alive, that guy. That was quite some time ago. But you know, they did it. He was down by the river. He was like a farmer or a local landowner or something. These Australian guys who had been on the railway were in those long-tail boats ripping up the river, and they wanted a beer. So they pulled in to see this guy and said, can we get a beer here? Can we buy a beer from you? And he said, no, if you want to come ashore, I'll give you one. Then he found out who they were, and that was Weary Dunlop was part of that party. And Weary struck up a conversation with this guy, and that's how they ended up with this bloody fabulous, beautiful park. It's really, it's right on a valley. They've got an entire train down. I don't know how they've got a train down there because it's right down on the valley. A locomotive, it's all rusting and stuff, but a locomotive and a few carriages. All down this massive great big hill where there's no road. I don't know how they got it down there. They did. It's quite moving that Weary Dunlop is still respected by the Thai people in that part of the world. Yep. Yep.
Exercises around the coast of Australia and between New Zealand and Australia. Do you feel that there's a degree of complacency
More than a direct complacency, I think it's outright neglect. Absolutely. No one talks about a peace dividend anymore, do they? You know, that was the end of the Cold War. Oh, well, no need for this, no need for that, no need for the army, no need for the navy. You know, we'll just descale and invest in other things, right? I'm an economist by training. They used to call it the trade-off between guns and butter, right? We've gone heaps into the butter area, not so much in the guns area. We are completely and utterly vulnerable.
In Europe, you've got a country like Russia.
Yeah.
With 145 million people.
Yeah.
It's threatening Europe.
Yep.
Which is 660 million people.
Yep.
And Europe's asking a country like America that's 330 million.
Yep.
To protect it.
Yep.
It just seems to me that there's just this unbelievable level of complacency.
Europe has been free riding for a long time. That's what Trump's all about.
I mean, it should be Russia that is scared of Europe. I mean,
Well, they are historically, that's the problem.
Europe is like 5 times bigger than Russia.
Countries like Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea are coalescing, right? They're not liberal democracies. They're all autocracies of their various kinds, right? It's not a healthy sign that these people are now coalescing. The Chinese have offered unrestricted help to the Russians in their fight against Europe. So that's why they're scared. They're not really scared of the Russians. They're scared of the Chinese backup. Unrestricted assistance, right? If anyone thinks that the Chinese, if they dominate this area, are going to be any less or any more compassionate or any less aggressive or barbarous than the Japanese were in the 1940s, they've got rocks in their head. We need to harden up. We need to harden up pretty quickly, in my view. Right? As far as Europe goes, Europe was divided during the Cold War. And Eastern Europe and Western Europe are pretty much two totally different things. But the dividing line was through Germany. The Germans had to get their mojo back. But they've been so browbeaten because of what happened in the 1940s that they're reluctant to do that. I can understand that psychologically. My surname's German, even though my family's been here since the gold rush. I understand that, but they really need to harden up. They need to get their mojo back. And they are gradually realising the situation in Europe is pretty grim. The people who are holding the torch now in Europe, hang on, the people who are holding the torch now in Europe are the Poles and Hungarians. Why? Because they've been through that bullshit. They don't want it anymore.
West Germany was spending 4.5% of GDP on defence during the Cold War.
Yep.
For 50 odd years, they were sitting there taking their obligation seriously.
Yep.
And they took it so seriously that they caused the Soviet Union to collapse.
Well, that wasn't the Germans. That was
Europe.
It was a mixture of, the Pope was a mixture of solidarity movement from Danzig or Gdansk, and it was Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
To a lesser extent, Maggie Thatcher.
But Europe just seems to be just.
It's the whole peace dividend. Everybody, no one realises that these people, or very few people realise how bastardly these people are. They don't care about humanity. When we go to fight and that sort of stuff, we've seen what all the stories coming out of Afghanistan about Ben Roberts-Smith and that sort of stuff. You know, whatever's happened in Afghanistan, I deployed to Afghanistan for 12 months, but I never saw anything like that. So we are concerned about a human rights record. Countries like Iran, Russia, and bloody North Korea and China don't give a toss about that. They don't care about that. So how do you reconcile those two positions? That's why I mentioned specifically liberal democracy, because we do care about our reputation. We do care about humanity. We do care about how we treat people. These people don't. Couldn't give a flog. They don't care. Right? And if anyone thinks that China is going to be any less or any more compassionate than the Japanese were in the 1940s, these authoritarian powers are doing is trying to split the East and the West. Right? They're isolating us, no doubt about that. They're attempting to isolate us by controlling or installing client governments in the Pacific Islands, so they cut off our sea lanes of communication. And then they regard us as a farmer and mine. That's it. They don't care about us.
Yep.
So I'm an old Cold War soldier and a Cold War police officer.
Yep.
That's how I think. And I think my thinking is somewhat vindicated.
We were talking about the Japanese,
Yep.
and some of them are good and some of them are bad.
Yep.
Like all of us.
And for my for my faults, I was once a criminal lawyer. You understand that. And I understand that you put people in a dysfunctional position, like inside.
Yep.
And like in the Burmese railway, and you're going to get people who are dysfunctional.
Psychopathic.
What you're doing is creating dysfunctionality. And that's what I'm interested in talking about,
Sure.
not about the current politics.
Yep. I agree. But that was not.
I mean, I worked with people who were inside.
I've locked them up.
And you did too. Of course you did. Yeah, you understood. And it's that dysfunctionality that somehow, you know, people.
To us, it's dysfunctional. To them, it was a task.
Into a dysfunctional.
Hang on. I understand the
situation,
dysfunction stuff.
And
To us, it's dysfunctional. To them, according to their own code, their military code, it was quite justified. They have a task focus. They had to get a railway built, so they got it built. The end. It's a very good railway.
Is it?
Yeah, look, it functions as a railway from Bangkok to Kanchanaburi. It's a commuter railway. So
you're saying it's the same railway built before?
correct.
It hasn't been since then.
Well, the timbers have rotted, so they've replaced them as they go. But the design and the route is exactly the same. So you've got no argument from me about the stupidity of their mentality. But to us, it's in 2025 Australia is different to 1940s Japan. They were a subservient group of people who were completely devoted to their emperor and who had a job to do. They saw it as that's their. Yeah.
So could we go backwards a little bit?
Yep.
What was the how was your interest in this trip originated? Could you tell us something about how you developed an interest and met the people to get it organised?
Yes. I originally learned about this. I'd never heard about it. It was never taught about it at school. My mother died when I was 11 years old and my sister lived in Perth. So we went over to visit her. Her husband's mother, I don't know what relationship that is to me, but I was 11 years old. So she gave me this book to take my mind off my mother's death called The Naked Island, which Jean knows about. It's a book by a guy called Russell Braddon, who was an Australian soldier, joined the army, thought he was going to go to the Middle East and fight Germans, but ended up being redirected to, he was in the 8th Division, to Singapore. He ended up going up, fighting the Japanese, rearguard action all the way down to Singapore and got locked up in Changi, then went up to the railway. I read that book cover to cover. If you want to read an authoritative first-person account of that, that's the one to read. That's a really good book. Then it's a good book. It's worth reading. I don't have a copy of it here. Then my parents moved to Singapore in 1975. My father remarried. They moved to Singapore, so I had a bit of interest in the Singapore-Malaysia relationship, a little bit with Thailand and stuff. I like travelling by train, so I travelled a fair bit between Singapore and Bangkok by train. And then it kind of just fell into abeyance, really. But when this group of mates of mine from the army in Melbourne was on a WhatsApp thing, thinking about going to Thailand to go to the railway to whatever, and I said, yeah, count me in. So, and that's how it happened. Now, the guy who arranged it, a guy called Stephen Ward, his girlfriend is Thai. In fact, I think she's originally Cambodian, but they're in touch. They're members of the St Andrews Medical Group of some sort, based in Bangkok, and they're also in touch with the Thai-Burma Railway Centre in Kanchanaburi, and they run these tours every so often. Steve's one of the tour guides that does it. So that's how we got on it. That's how we arranged it. Anyway, we all just sort of arrived in Bangkok at various places, at various times, and then linked up and got on the bus and off we went and did the tour.
Apparently the tourism industry around that whole scene is quite thriving. There's a lot of people doing that. Yeah, a bit like Anzac Day, it's had a sort of surprising resurrection among young people. Going to the ball service and all that sort of thing.
This is a folder of stuff that was given to us. Each one of us got one of these. So it goes into the itinerary and what we're doing, and a few photos and a few maps and stuff like that. So if you're considering doing it, let me know and I'll see if I can put you in touch with the people who run these tours. I will say that you need to have a good pair of shoes and some pretty good knees, because there was a fair bit of walking and stuff, but it was well worth doing from my perspective, especially with the guys that I did it with.
So the theme of lest we forget.
Yep.
Is going quite well.
The theme of lest we forget is going quite well, except we've forgotten. It's not taught. None of this stuff is taught in schools. Even at the War Memorial, there's a small section. Well, I haven't seen it, but there's a small section on the Thai-Burma Railway.
Yeah, I've always known about it, but I don't know how.
Well, it's a really seminal part of our history, because we as a liberal democracy live in a region where liberal democracy is the exception. And we need to be bloody conscious of that. So anyway, that's the mob that organised it.
Yeah.
They were very, very good, very professional. There's two guys who are involved in that Thailand-Burma centre in Kanchanaburi, both of whom are sons of Australian soldiers who served on the railway. So,
Do you feel that happened to the Japanese?
I haven't gone into detail about it, but as I mentioned during my presentation, a number of them were tried and executed specifically for what happened on the railway. I mean, there are other atrocities throughout Southeast Asia as well, the Sandakan Death March and a few other things. My father, in fact, was in the Air Force during the war. He was a navigator on mosquitoes, and he oversighted some of the AIF landings in Borneo. And I've seen some of the photographs, aerial photographs, recon photographs taken of that period where POWs were held. So have they been held accountable? A number of them were tried and executed, so yes. My only bone of contention is that I'm a believer in the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I was a policeman for 33 years, and I believe in historical truth. And I don't think this truth has been fully explained to the Japanese people. And I think they would be shocked, absolutely shocked. You know the Japanese people better than I do, but I think they would be shocked. And I think it would be too much of a shock if they found out what their ancestors had actually done. So I don't know what the resolution of that is, other than I will tell my truth.
It's a long history. The Japanese were doing dreadful things in Manchuria, of course, all through the
Yes.
1930s.
The rape of Nanking was one of the reasons that Thailand capitulated very quickly. They had learned what had happened in Nanking, where the Japanese just went berserk, raped and killed and pillaged and looted and did all sorts of bloody things. So they didn't want that to happen in Bangkok. So the Thai king just said, well, okay, we'll just pretty much give you free rein. Same in Indochina. The reasons they were able to cross the Gulf of Thailand into Thailand and Malaya was because the French Indochinese, under French administration, allowed them to do it. Why did they allow them to do it? Because the British had turned on the French in Morocco, in fact, at Mers El Kabir, where they'd sunk the French fleet. They were in no mood to assist the British. So it's a very complicated story. It's not just a simple act of bastardry by the Japanese. It's a whole bunch of nuances around this stuff.
Well, it continues to this day, of course, whereby Japan's got a particularly big population, aging
Yes.
population
Yep.
problem.
Yeah.
Small family sizes, people living a long time. Basically no immigration happening. You can't go there and become a Japanese citizen, and they import people from Korea as sort of second-class citizens who can't become citizens.
Which is the way they employ them on the railway as well.
Yeah.
The Koreans were bottom of the food pile as far as the bottom of the totem pole as far as the Japanese forces went. They were the most brutal. The Korean guards were renowned for their brutality.
So the problem of relationship between Japan and Korea is very real to this day.
Yeah, sure. I don't know enough about that region to comment. My dealings with both Koreans and Japanese people as individuals have been fine. My personal dealings, they've all been fine. I've had no problems with them. I did taekwondo when I was at university for about 4 years. And the instructor was a Korean guy, a very tough guy. They're pretty tough people, and they won't take no for an answer. So anyway, but they're divided as well between North and South. It's very problematic. And we've got North Korea, as I said, North Korea, China, Iran, and Russia all buddying up with each other. That's a problem. That's a threat to the world.
South Africa.
South Africa is part of it as well. Yep. And they'll get more recruits. You know, China's enlisting people through that Belt and Road Initiative. They're getting all these people, they're buying ports all around the world. They're naval bases. We know what they're up to. They want to be a global naval power to rival the US. So who knows what they're going to do. I don't think it bodes well for us though. If we are isolated in Southeast Asia, as I keep saying, we're a one-off liberal democracy. Us in New Zealand, liberal democratic countries, English speaking, westernised, primarily Christian, in an area that's not. And we are outnumbered, big time.
So we're going to do our best to be good friends with everyone that we can.
Which is why we keep forgetting this history, mate.
And as our Prime Minister says, agree on what we can and disagree where we must.
That's true. I mean, no one wants to pick a fight with the Japanese about this period of history, but I think it's fair that if we're going to be pilloried, there are several people who call us a racist nation. If we're going to be pilloried as racist, then I think we should be able to return fire with the same currency. We were subject to complete and absolute racism in the 1940s. Absolute, but no one talks about it. Same as when I was in East Timor. The Japanese, who basically ran the Indonesian military at the time, were completely racist against the East Timorese and killed 1,600 of them while we were there. So it doesn't fit the narrative of this whole, you know, white man bad, everybody else good, which is what seems to be driving most of this stuff. We've been subject to racism too. We are unique for a number of reasons. We've got a national policing body, although the bulk of normal policing is done by the states because it's a federated model. But we have an international mandate as well. So about 70% of crime that we deal with at the federal level has got international connections. But aside from that, when they required people for UN police duty, UN policing or UN duties that wasn't military, the police got involved. It's what I call firm diplomacy rather than hard diplomacy or soft diplomacy. And the whole rationale behind it is the word peacekeeping has got so many connotations. It's quite a broad word that can involve things like electoral stuff. It can involve normal peacekeeping, etc. But we've been involved in things like capacity and capability building for local Indigenous police, particularly in the Southwest Pacific. And the final part of my book relates to that as an alternative to the authoritarian model the Chinese are trying to post in some of these regions to install their own complicit, compliant governments by co-opting political elites, which is the way they operate. And the threat from an Australian perspective is our sea lanes. If we lose our sea lanes of communication, then we're pretty much buggered. That's what I suspect the Chinese were doing in the Southern Ocean, for instance. I think they're surveying some of the seabed there for whatever reason, to park submarines there so they can wake up at a certain time and do whatever they're going to do. They think long term, these people, and they don't really have too much in the way of scruples or morals.
There's an old Chinese military proverb that says, hide your strength, bide your time.
Sure.
You're not in a hurry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the Fabian Socialists, it's the same thing. So how we react to it as a country, who knows? I personally think we should wake up to the fact that we are under threat, our values are under threat. We're even being eroded now, internal, domestically. And I think we should just be aware of it.
Donald Trump gave us a little lecture and told us to increase our defence spending from 2 to 4%, or else.
Well, that's fine, but something's got to give. It's not the Australian taxpayer doesn't have an unlimited amount of funds. It's a limited resource. So something has to give. What they don't spend on butter, they have to spend on guns. So
We gave up smoking, drinking and gambling would be a good start. that's quite a few tens of billions per year.
Anyway, thank you very much. It's been great to have you along and
You're welcome.
I hear your historical travels and the emotional significance. It's really important for you. And it's also important for us to understand what's gone on and to have an appreciation